That shed was the ugliest thing in Juniper Ridge, Lorraine said, smiling as the bulldozer crushed it. Consider this my gift to the neighborhood. The steel tracks screamed against concrete before I could answer. I was halfway across the yard, barefoot, my coffee still sitting on the porch rail behind me. Cold mud pushed between my toes. Diesel smoke rolled over the fence, thick and bitter, mixing with the sharp chemical sting of chlorine leaking from a broken feed line. Then I heard the sound that made my stomach lock. A deep metallic groan. Not from the bulldozer. From beneath the ground. The main water line shuddered under my property like something wounded. Air ripped through the buried pipes, rattling valves all the way toward Juniper Ridge Estates. 400 houses connected to one aging network, and every pressure gauge inside that demolished building had just dropped toward zero. My phone started vibrating in my hand. 1 call, then 3, then 8. The screen filled with names I recognized from the monthly water reports. Miriam Klein, Juniper Ridge Daycare, Station 4 Volunteer Fire Department, the Assisted Living Center near the east entrance. Lorraine Voss stood beside the wreckage in white leather shoes, holding a clipboard against her pastel jacket. Not a speck of mud touched her. Behind her, the bulldozer idled over what remained of my father's well shed, its engine thumping slowly while pieces of corrugated metal hung from the bucket like torn skin. "You need to shut that machine off," I said. Lorraine tilted her sunglasses down and looked at me over the frames. "You were given notice, Mr. Mercer." "No. You sent an HOA violation to property that isn't inside your HOA. That structure was a safety hazard and a visual nuisance." The red warning light that had burned above the shed door for 38 years flickered once beneath the rubble. Then it went dark. Somewhere across the neighborhood, hundreds of faucets coughed at the same time. The sound traveled through open windows, a scattered chorus of pipes spitting air, toilets failing to refill, showerheads hissing dry. A woman screamed from the sidewalk across the road. Someone yelled that the daycare had no water. Car doors slammed. Dogs started barking. Lorraine's smile weakened. Only for a second. Then she lifted her chin and looked toward the growing crowd, as if she were preparing to address one of her board meetings. "Caleb has obviously shut down the system to retaliate," she announced. "The HOA will handle this." I looked at the crushed control cabinet beneath the bulldozer track. The pressure switches were flattened. The chlorination pump had split open. A blue-painted section of the main pipe, clearly marked as a live utility, stuck out of the dirt beside the machine. My father had painted that line himself. I could still hear his voice from 20 years earlier, calm above the steady hum of the pump. "People only notice water when it stops. Our job is to make sure they never have to." Lorraine stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Now you understand who makes decisions in this community." I stared past her at the wreckage. She thought she had demolished an abandoned shed. What she had actually destroyed was the control center for the only legal water source serving every house behind her stone entrance. 400 homes, 1 elementary daycare, 1 fire station, 1 assisted living facility, and no connection to the municipal water system. My phone rang again. This time, it was the county emergency management office. I wiped the mud from my hand before answering. "Caleb Mercer." A woman spoke quickly on the other end. "We're seeing a complete pressure loss across Juniper Ridge. Do you know what happened?" I watched Lorraine give the bulldozer operator a satisfied nod. "Yes," I said. "The HOA president just drove a bulldozer through the only well keeping them alive." The engine shut off. For the first time that morning, the neighborhood became completely silent. "So tell me, what would you do if someone destroyed the one thing 400 families couldn't live without?" 3 months before Lorraine buried my father's life's work under 12 tons of steel, the well shed was just part of the landscape. Most people drove past without seeing it. A 16 by 20 box of faded corrugated metal tucked behind cottonwoods at the edge of my 18 acres. The roof had rust along the western seam. One hinge squealed in cold weather. The white paint my father applied in 1998 had faded to the color of old bone. It wasn't pretty. It was never supposed to be. Inside, the air always smelled like iron, damp concrete, and the faint bite of chlorine. A 40-horsepower pump hummed beneath the floor. Gauges trembled on copper lines. Relays clicked inside a gray control panel. Every few minutes, a pressure valve released a soft hiss that reminded me of someone breathing in their sleep. That sound had been part of my life since I was 8 years old. "My name is Caleb Mercer." I'm 44, a licensed groundwater contractor, and for 11 years I worked operations for the County Water Authority. I've rebuilt pumps during ice storms, traced contaminated lines through flooded basements, and spent enough nights beside emergency generators to know exactly how fast civilization gets ugly when the taps stop working. But before any of that, I was Wade Mercer's son. Dad drilled the original well during the drought of 1986. Crops were dying. Livestock ponds had turned to cracked bowls of mud. Neighbors hauled plastic tanks and pickup beds and rationed baths like they were crossing a desert. Dad found water 612 feet down. Cold, clean, reliable. He built the shed around the wellhead with his own hands. I still remembered the sound of his hammer striking galvanized nails and the taste of dust on my lips while I held boards steady. He painted the main supply pipe blue so nobody could mistake it for drainage. He mounted a red warning light above the door and kept a brass valve key hanging on a hook beside the emergency panel. "Never move this," he told me. "When everything else fails, this opens the bypass." Back then, Juniper Ridge didn't exist. There were fields, 2 cattle ranches, and a narrow county road lined with cedar posts. Then developers arrived with glossy maps and promises of 4-bedroom homes, walking trails, and dependable municipal utilities. The city water line was supposed to reach them before the first 100 houses were occupied. It didn't. Construction had already started, buyers were signing contracts, and the developer needed a temporary solution. Dad agreed to supply water from our well under a limited emergency agreement. 10 years, maximum. They would pay maintenance costs, build their own connection, and leave the well under Mercer control. 10 years became 15, then 20. By the time I inherited the property, 400 homes depended on that temporary line. Most residents had no idea. They paid their monthly water charges to the HOA and assumed the water came from the city. Lorraine encouraged that belief. Juniper Ridge brochures described community-managed utility service, without mentioning that the community owned no well, no pump, and no legal source of water. Every Tuesday morning, I inspected the equipment. I checked pressure levels, tested chlorine residuals, logged pump cycles, and listened for changes in the motor's rhythm. Dad taught me that machines warn you before they fail. A vibration, a hot bearing, a click arriving half a second late. That shed spoke constantly. You just had to respect it enough to listen. The morning Lorraine first walked onto my land, I was replacing a worn pressure switch. Her white Range Rover stopped beside the fence, tires crunching across gravel she had no right to use. She stepped out, stared at the shed, and wrinkled her nose. "So that's the eyesore," she said. I tightened the final screw and looked at the 400 houses rising behind her. "No," I said, "that's their water." Lorraine Voss didn't come to Juniper Ridge to manage a neighborhood. She came to redesign one. By the time she was elected HOA president, she had already sold 12 houses inside the subdivision and convinced half the board that property values depended on matching flower beds, stone mailboxes, and the removal of anything she considered unpleasant. Her newest campaign was called the Juniper Ridge Renewal Project. The brochures arrived in every mailbox on thick cream paper. They showed a new limestone entrance, ornamental pear trees, black iron fencing, and a landscaped overlook where real estate agents could photograph families beneath a polished metal sign. The rendering looked expensive. It also placed the entire project directly over my well shed. Lorraine returned 2 days after our first meeting, this time with a landscape architect, 2 board members, and a man carrying a camera on a stabilizer. They walked along my fence as if touring property they had already purchased. I was inside the shed checking the chlorine injector when I heard Lorraine's voice through the open door. "We'll soften this whole area," she said. "Trees here, stonework there. Once that structure is gone, buyers will finally see a proper entrance." The pump vibrated beneath my boots. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a blue shop rag. "You're standing on private property." The cameraman lowered his equipment. One board member looked at the gravel. Lorraine didn't move. "We're conducting a visual assessment." From 6 feet past my survey marker, she glanced at the steel pin beside her shoe, then smiled as if boundaries were minor inconveniences invented for other people. "This facility affects the entire community, Caleb. That gives us a legitimate interest. It gives you an interest in receiving water. It doesn't give you ownership of the land or the equipment." The landscape architect unfolded a site plan across the hood of Lorraine's Range Rover. My shed had been replaced by a stone pavilion. The wellhead wasn't marked. Neither were the power lines, chemical feed system, or buried main running beneath the proposed entrance. I tapped the blank space with one finger. "Where's the pump?" Lorraine gave a small laugh. "We assumed all of this could be relocated." "To where?" She pointed toward the back of my acreage. "Somewhere less visible." Moving a 600-foot production well wasn't like dragging a garden hose behind a fence. The shed sat where it did because the well sat beneath it. The electrical service, pressure tanks, bypass line, and distribution main had been engineered around that exact location. "You can't relocate it," I said. "You'd have to drill a new well, permit it, test it, rebuild the controls, and shut down service during the changeover." "How long?" "Months, if you find water." Her expression tightened at that last part. The board members exchanged a glance. Lorraine folded her arms. "Then perhaps the HOA should acquire the facility." She opened her leather folder and handed me a printed offer. $40,000. The pump alone was worth more than that. The water rights, easement controls, and land beneath the system made the number insulting. "You're missing a zero," I said. "We're offering fair value for an aging utility. You're offering shed value for a water system." Her smile remained in place, but the skin around her eyes hardened. Lorraine stepped closer. Her perfume carried over the iron smell from the well house, sweet and sharp enough to sting. "You're one man controlling water for 400 families. That arrangement is outdated. The arrangement is legal. It's also inconvenient. For you. For progress." Behind us, the pump cycled on. The pressure gauge climbed smoothly, feeding every kitchen, shower, and fire hydrant inside Juniper Ridge. Lorraine looked at the rusted siding instead of the machinery, keeping her community alive. "I can make this difficult," she said quietly. I handed the offer back. "You can make noise." She took the paper without looking down. Then she stared at the well shed the way people stare at something they've already decided to destroy. As her Range Rover pulled away, gravel snapped beneath the tires. The landscape plan remained on the hood for 1 second before the wind lifted it. It struck my fence and landed face up in the dirt. Across the top, in Lorraine's handwriting, 3 words had been underlined twice. "Remove existing eyesore." The first violation notice arrived 4 days later. It was taped to my gate in a clear plastic sleeve, as if Lorraine expected Rain to respect her authority more than I did. Unapproved exterior structure. Visual blight. Potential health hazard. The paper listed 7 sections of Juniper Ridge covenants. None applied to my property. My land had existed before the subdivision, before the HOA, and before Lorraine discovered that a clipboard could make weak people feel powerful. I photographed the notice, removed it, and mailed my response by certified delivery. 1 page. Parcel map. Well permit. Recorded easement. A sentence explaining that Juniper Ridge possessed water access rights, not ownership or regulatory control. Lorraine answered with 9 pages. She included photographs of rust on the western wall, weeds growing near the fence, and a close-up of condensation beneath a pressure line labeled possible chemical leak. It was water. The chlorine feed system sat 6 feet away. Facts didn't matter to her. Images did. At the next HOA meeting, she projected those photographs onto a screen behind the board table. I stood in the back of the clubhouse while residents whispered around me. The room smelled like burnt coffee, carpet cleaner, and the vanilla candles Lorraine used to hide both. "This deteriorating structure threatens community safety," she announced. "The owner has refused every reasonable effort to cooperate." I raised my hand. Lorraine kept talking. She described the shed as abandoned, despite receiving monthly operating reports signed by me. She called the well unreliable, even though pressure logs showed 99.9% service continuity. Then she displayed the renewal rendering with the stone pavilion glowing beneath an artificial sunset. People applauded. That was Lorraine's talent. She could wrap theft and landscaping and make it sound like progress. When she finally acknowledged me, her smile was already prepared. "Mr. Mercer, you have 2 minutes. The facility is licensed, inspected, and active," I said. "Your subdivision receives every gallon of water through the equipment you're calling abandoned." A man near the front turned toward Lorraine. She lifted one hand. "No one is disputing that Caleb has been involved in maintenance." Involved. Her smile sharpened. The community pays for water. Therefore, the community has standing to demand appropriate standards. You pay for delivery under a temporary supply agreement. You don't own the source. The room changed. Not much. Just enough. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered, "Temporary." Lorraine's fingers tightened around her silver pen. This meeting is not the forum for technical distractions. Ownership isn't technical. She struck the gavel once. The crack echoed across the room. Then she made the mistake that would matter later. No individual should control a resource the entire community depends on. She said it clearly, into the microphone, in front of 80 residents and the camera recording every meeting for HOA archives. She knew the neighborhood depended on my well. She knew before the bulldozer ever arrived. The harassment accelerated after that night. I received daily fines for fence discoloration, industrial noise, unauthorized chemical storage, and obstruction of a proposed community beautification corridor. Lorraine posted warnings online claiming I intended to raise water rates unless residents supported her acquisition plan. Then survey flags appeared inside my property line. Orange stakes marked trees for removal. White paint crossed my gravel. A blue line showed where the main pipe ran beneath the ground. I confronted Lorraine beside her Range Rover while she photographed the shed. "You're marking live utilities without permission. We're planning. You're trespassing. We're improving." I pointed to the blue paint. "That line feeds every house behind you." She glanced at it, then back at me. "Then perhaps you should stop using essential infrastructure as leverage." I could feel the brass valve key in my pocket, its teeth pressing against my palm. "My father kept that system running for 38 years. And your father," she said, "was never elected." The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside the shed, a relay clicked and the pump started its steady hum. Lorraine looked toward the sound. Her expression was calm now. Too calm. That was when I understood the notices weren't meant to make me comply. They were meant to manufacture permission. 5 days later, Lorraine stopped manufacturing permission and used it. I was 38 miles away, replacing a failed control relay at a county booster station, when my phone vibrated against the steel workbench. Motion detected, West Service Gate. The room smelled like hot wiring insulation and machine oil. Rain tapped the metal roof above me. I wiped my fingers on my jeans and opened the security feed. At 7:13 a.m., a yellow bulldozer rolled through my open gate. Not over it. Through it. The steel tracks crushed the lower hinge and dragged the chain across the gravel. Orange survey flags snapped beneath the machine. Lorraine's white Range Rover followed close behind, clean enough to reflect the gray morning sky. She stepped out wearing a cream raincoat and carrying the same silver pin she used at HOA meetings. Graham Sutter climbed down from the bulldozer. I had seen his company trucks around town, grading, trenching, foundation work. He wasn't inexperienced. That made what happened next worse. At 7:16, Graham walked toward the shed and stopped beside the blue line painted across the ground. He pointed at it. The camera microphone caught his voice through the rain. "That mark looks like a live utility." Lorraine didn't even glance down. "It's an abandoned private line. There's a warning light on the building. It hasn't been inspected in years." A lie. The inspection sticker was mounted beside the door, dated 6 weeks earlier. Graham looked toward my house. "Owner, no, we're here." Lorraine opened her folder and showed him a piece of paper. The board authorized emergency removal. The paper never left her hand. Graham never read it. I called him. The number went straight to voicemail. I called Lorraine. She declined the call. At 7:17, Graham climbed back into the cab. The diesel engine rose from an idle to a hard mechanical roar. I watched from a county pump room while the bucket lifted. "Don't do it," I said to a screen that couldn't hear me. The first strike folded the western wall inward. Corrugated steel shrieked against the frame. The red warning light swung by its conduit, flashing over the mud like a wounded signal. Pressure gauges snapped from their mounts. Copper tubing bent beneath the bucket. I grabbed my keys and ran. Rain hit my face as I crossed the parking lot. My boots slipped on wet pavement. I called county dispatch and told them an active water facility was being demolished without authorization. At 7:20, while I was pulling onto the highway, the bulldozer drove over the control cabinet. The camera shook. Glass burst from the gauge faces. Gray electrical boxes flattened beneath the tracks. The main pump contactor sparked once, bright blue against the dirt. Then came the sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. The motor changed pitch. It dropped from a steady industrial hum to a low, strained growl. At 7:22, the bucket tore through the chlorine feed line. Clear solution sprayed across the broken concrete. Lorraine stepped backward, covering her nose. "What is that smell?" she shouted. Graham leaned out of the cab. "You said this was empty." "It is. Keep going." The blue line was fully exposed now. The utility markings were impossible to miss. So was the steel sign beside the door, active potable water system. Authorized personnel only. Graham hesitated again. Lorraine pointed toward the shed. "Finish it." At 7:24, the eastern wall collapsed. The red light flickered beneath a sheet of twisted metal. Once, twice, then darkness. The timestamp changed to 7 hours, 24 minutes, and 13 seconds. The pump stopped. Not gradually. Not with the controlled click of a shutdown relay. It died with a deep metallic groan that traveled through the buried main and into 400 homes. For 7 seconds, nobody moved. Rain struck the wreckage. Diesel exhaust drifted past the camera. Somewhere beyond the fence, a dog began barking. Then Lorraine turned toward Graham and smiled. "He'll finally learn who runs this community." She had no idea the Cedar Post camera was still recording. No idea her voice had been uploaded to 3 separate servers. And no idea that in 11 minutes, she had created the most complete piece of evidence I would ever need. By the time I reached Juniper Ridge, the neighborhood had already started coming apart. Cars crowded both sides of the entrance road. Parents stood in driveways holding empty pitchers. Children pressed their faces against windows while toilets gurgled behind them. Every few seconds, another faucet coughed air through the buried network. The assisted living center had rolled 2 residents outside in wheelchairs because the bathrooms could no longer flush. At the daycare, teachers were lining up bottled water on a folding table. Station 4's engine sat beside a hydrant with its intake hose connected, but the pressure gauge showed nothing. 0. The smell hit me before I reached my gate. Diesel. Wet soil. Chlorine. The shed was gone. All that remained was twisted metal, broken conduit, and pieces of my father's concrete floor pushed into the mud. The bulldozer sat across the main line like an animal guarding a kill. Lorraine stood near the road speaking into 3 phones at once. When she saw me, she ended one call and raised her voice. "There he is." Heads turned. A man holding a dry garden hose stepped toward me. "Why did you shut off our water?" "I didn't." Lorraine moved between us before I could say more. "Mr. Mercer has been threatening the community for weeks," she announced. "This appears to be retaliation because the HOA exercised its legal authority." The crowd tightened. People were scared. Fear makes simple lies feel useful. A woman shouted that her husband needed dialysis equipment cleaned. Someone else said the school cafeteria had closed. A restaurant owner demanded to know who would pay for spoiled food and lost business. Lorraine pointed at me. "Ask him. He controls the well." I looked at the wreckage behind her. "The pump isn't off," I said. "The pump is under her bulldozer." Silence moved through the crowd in small waves. Lorraine's face hardened. "That is an outrageous accusation." I held up my phone. "I watched you destroy it." Her eyes flicked toward the cedar post near the cottonwoods. "Just once. That was enough." County emergency vehicles arrived less than 5 minutes later. Tessa Rowan stepped out of the first truck wearing rubber boots and a dark field jacket. She had inspected my system 6 weeks earlier and knew every valve by number. She stopped at the gate. "What happened?" "Unauthorized demolition," I said. "Control cabinet crushed. Chlorine line ruptured. Main pressure collapsed at 7:24. Tessa looked at Lorraine. "Who ordered the work?" Lorraine lifted her clipboard. "The HOA authorized removal of an abandoned hazardous structure." Tessa stared at the steel sign lying face up in the mud. "Active potable water system." Then she looked at the blue utility markings beneath the bulldozer tracks. "This facility was not abandoned." Lorraine's voice sharpened. "We were told it was obsolete." "By whom?" Lorraine glanced toward Graham. He was standing beside the machine, rain running off his jacket. He looked pale. Tessa turned to me. "Can you restart from the main panel?" "There is no main panel." "Backup controls?" "Possibly. But the chemical feed line is open, and the distribution system lost pressure. That changed everything. When a water network loses pressure, groundwater, mud, and bacteria can be pulled through damaged joints. Restarting the pump without testing could send contamination into every home. I could have forced the system back online. I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge. Because water can look clean and still put a child in the hospital. Tessa called the county operations center and requested tanker trucks, sampling crews, and an emergency boil water notice. The fire chief ordered portable tanks for hydrant coverage. Health officials closed the daycare kitchen and the restaurants along Juniper Ridge Drive. Lorraine watched each call become another invoice. Then she raised her phone and started recording me. "Residents deserve to see this," she said. "Caleb Mercer is refusing to restore service." I stepped beside the wreckage and pulled the crushed inspection tag from beneath a sheet of metal. "You destroyed the controls. You own the system. You destroyed the disinfectant line. You are responsible for maintenance. You drove a bulldozer through it." Her mouth opened, but Tessa cut her off. "No one touches this site until my investigation is complete." I taped the county shutdown order to the remaining fence post. The paper snapped in the wind above the twisted steel. Behind me, Lorraine was already telling residents I had chosen to leave them without water. I let her talk. Every lie she told was being recorded. And beneath the mud, my father's emergency bypass was still waiting for the right key. The answer was waiting in a steel cabinet my father had bolted to the basement wall 30 years earlier. By dusk, tanker trucks lined Juniper Ridge Drive. Their diesel engines idled beneath portable floodlights while residents filled plastic containers and argued with HOA volunteers. The air smelled like wet pavement, chlorine, and fear. Tessa followed me into the house. The basement steps creaked beneath our boots. At the bottom, I pulled a canvas cover from the cabinet. Dust rose through the flashlight beam. Wade Mercer had labeled every drawer with black marker: permits, pump logs, easements, emergency plans. The final drawer read temporary supply agreement. The brass key stuck once before the lock turned. Inside were 3 binders, a rolled engineering map, and a yellow envelope sealed with my father's handwriting. "Caleb, if they ever claim the well belongs to them, start here." My throat tightened. Tessa opened the first binder while I spread the map across Dad's workbench. The paper smelled old and dry. Red lines showed the original subdivision. A blue line ran from our well to the first 48 homes. Beside it, the developer had drawn a future municipal connection in green. Completion required before occupancy of Home 100. Juniper Ridge had 400 homes. The green line had never been built. Tessa turned another page. "They were supposed to disconnect from your system 26 years ago. They never did. They also certified to the county that permanent water service was complete. That certification had allowed construction to continue. It had allowed mortgages to close, insurance policies to issue, and families to buy houses believing their water came from a public utility." The next binder held board correspondence. Most of it was routine, maintenance invoices, pressure reports, chlorine tests. Then Tessa found a printed email dated 14 months earlier. The sender was Juniper Ridge's own attorney. The recipient was Lorraine Voss. The subject line read Mercer Facility, Legal Exposure. I read it twice. The attorney warned that the HOA possessed only limited distribution rights. It had no authority to enter my land, alter the equipment, or remove the shed. Any interference could terminate Juniper Ridge's only lawful water supply and expose the board to emergency damages. At the bottom, Lorraine had replied with 6 words: "We will address the structure internally." Tessa looked at me. She knew. She knew everything. A knock sounded upstairs. Owen Rusk stood at my back, door holding a laptop beneath his coat. The HOA treasurer looked as if he had aged 10 years since morning. Rainwater ran from his hair onto the kitchen floor. "I need to show you something," he said. We returned to the basement. Owen opened financial ledgers dating back 9 years. Every homeowner had been charged a monthly municipal connection reserve. The fee started at $35 and climbed to $82. Millions had been collected. Almost none remained. The money had paid for Lorraine's limestone entrance, decorative lighting, clubhouse renovations, landscaping contracts, and something called executive property consultation. Owen clicked through invoices. The consultation company belonged to Lorraine's brother. Tessa photographed the screen. "You reported this?" I tried. Owen's voice cracked. Lorraine removed me from the finance committee and told the board I was confused. He opened one final folder. Inside was a scanned copy of the demolition authorization Lorraine had shown Graham. The county permit number belonged to a swimming pool removal completed 2 years earlier. She hadn't just ignored the law. She had disguised the demolition with a recycled permit. Upstairs, my phone began vibrating across the kitchen counter. Lorraine had posted another video blaming me for the outage. I listened to her voice drift down the stairwell. This crisis was caused by one man's refusal to cooperate. Tessa closed the binder. Owen stared at the floor. I folded my father's map along its original creases and placed the brass valve key beside it. Lorraine thought the destroyed shed had buried the truth. Instead, the bulldozer had cracked open 26 years of fraud. And now the whole neighborhood was about to see what had been hidden underneath. At 5:42 the next morning, my father's generator coughed back to life. The first turn of the key gave me nothing but a dry metallic click. The second made the starter grind. On the third, the old diesel engine caught with a violent shudder that rattled dust from the rafters of the backup enclosure. Black smoke rolled through the vent. The floor vibrated beneath my boots. I hadn't heard that sound since Dad died. For 1 second, I could almost see him beside me, sleeves rolled above his elbows, listening to the engine with his head tilted. Machines tell you what they need, Caleb. Don't rush them. Tessa stood behind the safety barrier while 2 county technicians monitored the sampling ports. The damaged main had been isolated. The broken chemical line was capped. Temporary chlorination equipment sat on a steel cart beside the buried bypass valve. All we needed was flow. I took the brass key from my pocket. Its edges were worn smooth where my father's hands had gripped it for decades. I pushed it through the access sleeve hidden beneath a concrete cover 30 yards from the demolished shed. The key dropped into the valve stem with a heavy clunk. I turned it slowly. At first, nothing happened. Then water moved beneath us. The pipe gave a low tremor. Air hissed through the temporary manifold. A pressure gauge lifted from 0 to 12, hesitated, then climbed past 20. Tessa watched the needle. Hold it there. I stopped turning. Technicians drew samples, tested disinfectant levels, and flushed sediment from the east line. Brown water surged through a discharge hose, then faded to cloudy gray. After 40 minutes, it ran clear. By sunrise, the county approved limited service restoration. I opened the valve another quarter turn. Across Juniper Ridge, 400 faucets came back to life. The sound reached us through open windows and phone calls. Pipes hammered. Toilets refilled. Sprinklers spit muddy water across perfect lawns. At the assisted living center, Miriam Klein held a glass beneath her kitchen tap and started crying when the stream turned clear. Lorraine arrived 10 minutes later. Her Range Rover stopped behind 3 Black County vehicles and 2 sheriff's cruisers. She climbed out wearing sunglasses despite the gray sky. "What is this?" she demanded. Nobody answered. Investigators walked past her carrying evidence boxes. One entered the clubhouse with Owen. Another photographed the bulldozer, the false permit, and the blue utility markings Lorraine had ordered Graham to ignore. She spotted me beside the bypass controls. "You restored it," she said. "The county restored safe service. You could have done that yesterday. Not without risking contamination." She turned toward the residents gathering near the entrance. "This proves he manufactured the crisis." Tessa stepped between us and handed Lorraine a document. Emergency suspension of HOA utility authority. Lorraine stared at the page. A sheriff's deputy handed her another. Preservation order for financial records. Then came the third. A notice of investigation for property destruction, falsified permitting, environmental violations, and misappropriation of infrastructure funds. Her sunglasses lowered slightly. "This is ridiculous. I acted for the community." I opened the security video on my tablet. The screen showed Graham beside the blue line. "That mark looks like a live utility." Then Lorraine's voice. "It's an abandoned private line." The footage continued until her final order filled the silence around us. "Finish it." Residents watched her point at the shed, watched the wall collapse, watched her smile after the pump died. He'll finally learn who runs this community. No one spoke when the video ended. Lorraine looked toward the clubhouse, but the board members standing near the door stepped away from her. Owen removed his HOA badge and placed it on the hood of her Range Rover. One by one, the others did the same. The water moved steadily beneath our feet. The pressure gauge climbed to 58 and held. Lorraine had spent years convincing everyone that power belonged to the person holding the gavel. That morning, her authority disappeared beneath the sound of running water. And my father's old pump never missed another beat. 6 months later, the new pump house stood on the same concrete foundation Lorraine had tried to erase. It wasn't pretty. That was intentional. I rebuilt it with reinforced steel walls, impact-resistant doors, flood sensors, backup controls, and enough cameras to record a mosquito crossing the property line. The county installed a remote pressure monitor. The fire department added an emergency connection. Every critical valve now had 2 independent power sources. The western wall still faced the entrance to Juniper Ridge. Mounted across, it was one twisted sheet of corrugated metal from my father's original shed. The bulldozer tracks had folded it through the middle. Rust streaked the edges. Beneath it, I installed a small black plaque. Ugly, but essential. Residents stopped to photograph it during morning walks. Lorraine hated that plaque. She didn't live in Juniper Ridge anymore, but according to Owen, she drove past twice after the court hearings began. The first time, she slowed down. The second time, she never stopped. Her fall wasn't loud. It happened through signatures, subpoenas, canceled contracts, and numbers printed in black ink. The HOA removed her by unanimous vote. The county revoked every permit connected to the renewal project. Graham's company lost its municipal contracts and paid for the damaged equipment through its liability insurer. Lorraine faced civil judgments for trespass, destruction of essential infrastructure, and fraudulent permitting. The financial investigation uncovered more than $2 million diverted from the water reserve. Some paid for landscaping. Some paid her brother's consulting company. The rest disappeared through invoices for work nobody could prove had happened. The district attorney called it a continuing fraud investigation. I called it paperwork finally catching up with arrogance. The settlement rebuilt the entire system without charging residents another dollar. It also created the Juniper Ridge Water Cooperative, operated separately from the HOA. Every payment, inspection, repair, and test result became available online. Owen served as temporary treasurer. Tessa chaired the safety committee. I kept ownership of the well and signed a transparent operating agreement with the residents. They received guaranteed service, emergency protections, and a deadline for constructing a permanent municipal connection. I received something my father never had. Recognition that the well was not an embarrassment hidden behind landscaping. It was infrastructure. One cold morning in November, Miriam Klein visited while I was checking the new chlorination panel. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee and moved slowly across the gravel. I used to think the water came from the city, she said. Most people did. She looked at the metal plaque. Your father knew? He knew they would forget. Miriam handed me a cup. Steam carried the smell of dark roast into the sharp morning air. He saved us anyway. The pump started beneath our feet. Not the strained groan I had heard on demolition day. This was a deep, steady vibration, smooth enough to feel through the soles of my boots. 58 pounds of pressure. Exactly where it belonged. Across Juniper Ridge, sprinklers clicked on. Showers ran. Coffee machines filled. A fire engine tested the hydrant near the east gate, sending a bright arc of water into the pale sky. Nobody cheered. They didn't need to. Real infrastructure does its best work without an audience. I kept my father's brass valve key hanging beside the emergency panel. The metal had darkened with age, but the teeth still carried the marks from the morning I opened the bypass. Sometimes I held it and remembered what Dad told me inside that old shed. People only notice water when it stops. Lorraine believed power meant choosing what everyone else had to look at. She measured leadership in stone entrances, perfect lawns, and how quickly people obeyed when she raised her voice. My father measured it in pressure gauges. He believed power was quiet, buried, maintained, and ready when somebody turned a handle. The new municipal line broke ground the following spring. Until it was finished, my well continued serving every home Lorraine had endangered. And every morning, when 400 faucets came to life, they made the same soft rushing sound. Not revenge, not victory, just justice, flowing exactly where it was supposed to go.